Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 247. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today, Aimee O'Keefe. Aimee, how are we doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming on. Aimee is the nutritionist with Manchester United Women at the minute. So we're going to talk all things nutrition today. And I'm excited to get into it because Aimee presented recently at our event in Manchester, which I've got to say went down very well. You nearly got kept there all night with questions, so that's always a good sign. So it's great to have you on, Aimee. I'm keen to get into some of the topics, but we always start in the same place, and that is on you and your background. So can you take us on a little journey through your career so far?
Yeah, so background-wise, if you go back to starting with like a sporting background, so my background is football. From when I was like 3, 4, played in like boys teams all out to 11. And then, I guess as I got a little bit older, I like found drinking and going out partying from when I was 16 and I kind of dipped in and out of it. And then from there, obviously being like sporty, that's all I was interested in, whether it was in school doing PE or in college I'd done a BTEC in sport. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew it was something to do with sport, but what career path I had no idea. And then went to university. I did actually go to a university in Dundee. I'm not going to say it was a mistake, but yeah, it just wasn't for me. So came back, worked, and then stayed in Liverpool to go to university. And then I done a undergrad. I think it was health, nutrition, fitness. Still didn't know what I wanted to do, and then decided after that I was going to work for the NHS. Went into like a child weight management program, working with overweight children and their families, which was really good at that time in my career. It was like literally a year out of university working with, really poor families as well, and traveling all around Liverpool, doing after school sessions. Like it was really good, but it was really frustrating. And then I've always been like involved in fitness and exercise. So I started to go down a PT route and like the coaching route. And then I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go self-employed. I want to leave the public health sector. And then, I was self-employed for maybe 7 years, completely out of education in terms of like being in any courses or anything, studying. And then, I was working with a Liverpool youth academy player who was a female, and she was injured for a whole year. And then it was a hard stress fracture to her back. And at the time, I didn't know too much about why they were so common in teenagers. And I started to link together that it was due to like too much energy going out and not enough energy going in, potentially. And it just triggered a interest. And I've always had an interest in nutrition, but it was definitely more of like, okay, I want to take this like way further. So then I went back to university, and then done a master's in sport nutrition at John Moores. And then, going back to university after like 8 years away was so hard. Forgot how to do like a reference list, like write an assignment. First assignment was shocking. But it was the hardest year I've ever done. But it was all like, it's opened like the biggest network, like Graham Close and James Morton and Carl Angenevers there did a big deal. And they put you in contact with people to give you opportunities. And I think for that reason, like John Moore's, I've got like a massive, I guess I'm in debt to them forever for that. But really good networks. And I got the opportunity to do a placement at Manchester United during my studies for 6 months and just treated it as a full-time job. There'd never been anyone before, so I just, not going to lie, winged it a little bit, as you do when you doing a course and you're still learning. But I loved it. And then I guess you can say I've been there ever since. So from 2020 to now, like from, volunteering to 1 day a week to now full time, which is mental, really.
Brilliant. I want to go into when you started out at United in a second, in terms of the first few approaches you took, but just going back to the job that you had with the NHS, what were some of the skill sets you feel that you developed back then? Obviously very different in terms of the clients and that you were working with, but is there much transfer to what you do now?
Yeah, I'd say there's loads, to be honest, Ben. So I'd say just having that like empathy to like just listen to, everyone's got a story, especially around nutrition. There's a reason why that family are overweight or the children's overweight. You did get parents like pouring the heart out to you. And so yeah, I think being a really good listener and showing that you really care, and showing that bit of empathy, I think has definitely transferred over to working day to day with females. I think nutrition is complicated, and with that much stuff going around the media and different people reading different things, but also some of the United girls, their history of nutrition, like for one, a lot of them haven't got any education history, and for two, I feel like sometimes females just try every diet in the book. So yeah, I guess just having that like real life understanding of where people have came from, I think it opened my eyes a lot to there's always like a why behind something.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. So going into that role then at United, when you first started and you've got obviously 3 years less experience of what you've got right now, what was the first approach that you took? Like practically, what were the first things that you put in place?
So do you know what? We're doing like a needs analysis questionnaire. So it was basically just a Billy Basic nutrition questionnaire, and it was just for me to assess what they knew, whether they even knew what carbohydrate was, whether they knew what protein was, what it does. So it just covered basics. It covered things like around like match day nutrition, like what did you do, and then from that, it gave us and it was anonymous, and it just gave us like a really good insight into, okay, that needs work, don't really need to touch base on that. So just give more of like a priority list. But when I looked at the list, I was like, I don't know how to section it off and how I actually now ask for the time to have with different players, because it had never been done before. So that was really, I'm not going to say hard, but I think, yeah, I did make a conscious effort as well, thinking back now, to like just sit with the players around like meal times, and it was so awkward as well. It was actually nothing worse than like a stranger just sitting trying to make conversation. But I was very aware that I needed to get to know them as well at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'd say for the first couple of weeks, it was purely conversations while I was making this questionnaire. And it just gives more of like a plan. So even though I only had maybe 6 months, maybe a bit less, it just opens up conversations as well, which I think was the main thing. So that was the first action point. So it was more about I'm trying to think now. There was like a group education session, and then there was then when you obviously start to get to know people, they were like, oh, well, like the lunch is rubbish, or I hate that on breakfast. So they start like opening up and getting honest.
Yeah.
So then a lot of it was, communicating with the catering team. And at the time we were at Lee Sports Village, which was it's like a rugby stadium anyway. There was a lot of going backwards and forwards and trying to just make small tweaks to catering with a very small budget. And those easy wins, literally just adding bagels to breakfast, like I was a hero. So
Right.
just things as small as that, like what have they got for breakfast and what can we, I guess, cheaply add in. So it made a few people happy early on, which I think maybe that's why I'm still here today.
It ties in with exactly what you were talking about before, though, with that empathy, doesn't it? Because you've basically freed time up to find out more about them, and they're only going to become more open once they've got that relationship with you. And I know there is that awkward time, isn't there, when you're the newbie and no one really wants to speak to you. But when they do get to know you, obviously that is more likely when they are going to give you the information that you're trying to dig around for, aren't you, in a subtle way?
Yeah, and I think what I also was very aware of, that whether it's just this team in general, this team specifically, or it's a team thing across the board, I feel like I got way more like buy-in and trust from the players because they knew that I was not going anywhere. Like I wasn't just like here, maybe doing a course for one day and then you'll never see me again. I think they knew that I was there for like 6 months and I was always on like the end of a WhatsApp. So I think because I was there for a sustained period, it really helped with that like relationship building, because I think that's just, for me, that's the most important thing. And for like some players, you'll never have like the best relationship kind of thing. You can't be like, brilliant with every single person, but if you can be like that with 80-90% of the team, it has like a positive knock-on effect to someone that may be a bit shy or have a complicated relationship with nutrition and not really want to approach you or ask you. Like, I guess the more open other people are, and players talk, I'm not stupid. I've seen like that positive knock-on effect of, oh, come on, just ask it, or just message it, or do you know what I mean? Once you get to know someone.
Yeah. The other thing with that is that they've seen the impact straight away, haven't they? I know you said there about the bagels for breakfast, but that is literally an example of them mentioning something and something physically happening, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then they're recognizing it, that there's a change happening.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people say they're going to do things, and I'm sure I've done it in the past and not delivered on it, but players don't forget either.
No, so true.
Try and just always like back your word up, and you're gonna hit some red tape sometimes, but what I found in the past is just tell the players, try to do this, it can't happen at the minute, for one reason or another. I guess I've made a mistake in the past of trying to do something to change, being told no, and then not feeding back, and then it looks like I haven't actually been doing anything. So steep learning curves.
That's just that honesty and that transparency with players, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. With those initial questionnaires, was there anything when they fed back to you that you were surprised about, or was it things that you expected really in terms of the experience and knowledge level?
Do you know what? I was a bit surprised because I'd never been in an elite sport environment before or worked with elite athletes. I was naive enough to think that they would have like a basic level of nutrition understanding. But what I didn't understand until I was in it was, 2.5, 3 years ago, like the group of players, they hadn't been through like an academy like boys do. So really this education that I was, planning on delivering was for some of them the first time, which made loads of sense in the end when I was like, oh, so you haven't had support at under 21 level, or unless you've been selected for a national team and you've been lucky enough to have the odd presentation back like a few years ago. There really wasn't. So I was a bit shocked when I was like, oh my God, like some of them actually can't actually identify 3 carbohydrate sources. But there's a lot of context to it, and it made a lot of sense once I started to understand the bigger picture of where they came from, and the fact that they hadn't been really through a thorough academy development system either.
But on a career level, I suppose, for a nutritionist listening, that's a massive opportunity, isn't it? Because we're now talking about Man United, which I know that has changed across the 3 years since you've been there, a hell of a lot. But there's still going to be a hell of a lot of clubs out there or a hell of a lot of players in a similar position to what you're talking about there, which means there's a lot of opportunity, isn't there, for nutritionists, young nutritionists to reach out, offer services, and probably not expect it to be as well established a program as what you think it would be.
Yeah, definitely not, because even now, and I'll be completely honest with, you know, like what it looks like at Man United, even we call the academies RTCs. So even with that now, there's still not a, you know, a season-long nutrition education program that can be fully facilitated by nutrition staff, not even sports science staff. Like, you know, there's a structure there which placement students like myself have created over the past 2 or 3 years, but it's still not fully implemented. So it's like, you know, if you are someone who is looking to get into nutrition or looking for opportunities, like I'll tell you now, if Man United's RTC, like, you know, you're always short staffed, aren't you? Especially in women's football. Like, my advice would be can you get into an RTC, or can you volunteer around youth athletes? Because the more education they get, like the easier, you know, once they get to that transition to 21s, well, 18s, 21s, first team, like the smoother transition it will be. So yeah, I guess don't always aim for first team. You know, I was lucky enough that it kind of happened like that for me, but you know, there's no like disregard to anyone starting in an academy and you know, educating that pathway. It's like so important.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I wanted to discuss about effectively fueling players, getting the effective fueling for performance. So just before we go into it in a bit more detail, what are some of the first things that spring to mind for you when we're talking about fueling, some main considerations that players, coaches, nutritionists need to make around fueling for a match day?
Yeah, it's like what are they doing the day before is the biggest question. You know, the research doesn't lie. Like the most important day is match day -1, so the day before a game. Like, what does that day look like? Whether it's from a club perspective, like a training day perspective that you're part of or not part of, or what does it look like for the player? Whether, you know, you don't see them that day, so they're fully in control of what they're doing, and that'll be the first, I guess, low-hanging fruit that I'd ask questions around. Like, you know, what time you're getting up on a match day -1. You know, what does breakfast look like, if there is any, especially with like youth athletes, it's a bit of a nightmare for breakfast and things. But yeah, what does that look like first? And I'll tell you now, there'll be so much work that I'm still doing match day -1 stuff now, and I've been there 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, there's always, you know, tweaks and, you know, new players coming in, so you recycle that information. So I think that's like that is one of the most important starting blocks that you can begin with.
Yeah, brilliant. I know this might be sort of nailed down to each individual because you've got a lot of individual cases, haven't you, within a team environment, but are there any sort of mistakes, if we're going to call it that players make around fueling that you see commonly?
Good question. Mistakes. I'm going to say, when I first started, I think you can call it mistake, or you can call it like the fact they were unaware, is like having a bigger portion of pasta or rice or anything the day before a game is not carb loading. So there was a lot of, I guess, education needed around what carb loading actually was, and showing them the volumes of food or fluids that can be consumed to hit, you know, the required amount. So I guess that's not answering the mistake question.
No, I think it is to a point though, because I suppose that's like an awareness or an education, isn't it, that they've not got at that time. So
yeah,
you're giving them that, because I think that's I think if you speak to anyone on the street, that you try and get to pick out specific information like that about around nutrition, the majority of people aren't going to know, are they?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, yeah, and sometimes with that travel, like so adding in travel the day before a game, like obviously it's just like so common with the WSL when you've got away games, like say a player isn't hungry at lunch after training, or maybe they are, but they're in a rush, you know, they're late off the pitch, they need to just grab something, they need to get showered, they need to pack, they need to go on the coach. Like, for me, you can call it mistake or you can call it, you know, bad time management. Like, not what's the word I'm looking for? Consuming enough in that moment. Like, so if you've only got 10 minutes, like make the most of that 10 minutes. Take it on the
Yeah.
coach if you want to. So I guess that's more about like educating them around the importance of not missing a meal or missing part of a meal. Because it has a, you know, it has a knock-on effect to the next day. So I guess taking each meal time really seriously and thinking about, you know, if it is lunch that you're having and it's, I don't know, chicken, rice and veg, you know, realistically that's not going to be enough. Like, you need to add, I call them boosters. So whether it be like a fruit juice, a piece of fruit, you know, like an energy snack bar, like what does that look like? So if you are in a rush, like what are those like non-negotiables that you need to tick, whether it's a normal training day, a match day -1, whatever it is.
And then that education, then, does that make that easier to manage the individuals, because you're basically giving them the education on what their priorities are? And then obviously, because obviously with nutrition, you've got individual likes, dislikes, and all the rest of it. So that it becomes, I imagine it becomes quite hard work to get every individual case. But with that education, I'm guessing it makes it easier because you're giving them priorities, you're giving them like the blueprint, aren't you, of what they're doing and
Yeah.
why they're doing it.
Yeah, and with a lot of players, I think, you know, it's not for me to give them a, let's call it like a match day -1 plan, because it might work for one player out of the 25. Because if I give them a plan, a lot of the time it's my preferences. So some of them have obviously made their own match day -1 plan, and I think this might be a common thing. I'm not quite sure. Not really spoke about it before, but our players like consistency. So we have like the same match day -1 lunch and dinner, like each week. So, you know, it's not hard to pick your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just them finding, you know, how they can hit the targets with the snacks. But yeah, with education, a few like nudges, and it doesn't have to be group education. It can purely be, you know, just grabbing them like when you're walking up to the gym, or just seeing what they're eating without being like the food police, but then just being like, oh, you didn't have any, I don't know, pure fruit juice with that, like top that up next time, easy win, and just see if they do it the next time. But yeah, I don't know whether this is right or wrong. I don't like sit and eyeball what they're eating all the time. Like, it's not, I don't find that quite like a comfortable thing to do.
Yeah.
But you know, there's nothing wrong with like walking through the food room and just having a glance and like, you know, touching base every now and again. I don't want like my presence to end up being a negative, if that makes sense. I don't want to be eyeballing all the time what they're having to eat.
Yeah. No,
I think
100%.
there's like a fine line.
Yeah, no, I think so. And also people act in different ways, don't they, when they feel like they're being watched all the time. It probably leads to a bit of dishonesty and all the rest of it as well.
Yeah.
But I also think what you mentioned before, that when you speak to players on an individual basis and then they go away and they have conversations, those conversations are probably more important, isn't it? Like, oh, Aimee was telling me about whatever the topic is, and to consume this gives me this for this reason. They then go and tell 2 teammates, and straight away you've affected 3 people from one conversation.
Yeah.
And then it spirals from there, doesn't it? So I think that's the key way, I think, of making a big impact across a team, isn't it? Having those conversations.
Yeah, and I think this this like pre-season and season onwards, like that's like a massive focus to really, because and like in football there's never, a lot of time, and it feels like time gets less and less as the season goes on. So I think getting those like consultations in early, whether it's a sit down formal one or it's literally just like when players are walking over to the gym and you're kind of doing like a off the cuff, consultation with them, like in your own head kind of thing, and an action in them. So it doesn't necessarily. I've done a lot of group work, definitely the first 2 years, and then touch base with a few of it season just gone. But it was I was more biased towards speaking to players on their own or just grabbing them for 2 or 3 minutes here and there. But given the environment that we work in, like it is a really small space with no privacy really at the minute. But we're moving into a new building, so I think from like my standpoint and how professional my service can be, it hasn't worked with what we've got and adapted. But I think going into this season, we will be in a new building after pre-season, I think. So having that room where you've got your own privacy and space, it can only help players open up a bit more and not be worried that people are maybe listening in and listening to maybe any struggles that they've got.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? The privacy side of it, and that obviously grows the trust and everything then, doesn't it? And the willingness to open up from players as well.
Yeah, especially when, and we've not got a bad environment around like talking about periods and menstrual cycles. It's a really good culture around it, to be honest. Our previous performance coach, Alterna, she done like a really good job around just normalising the conversation. And I think, as normalised as the conversation is, it's still always nice to be able to, go into a bit more detail with a member of staff in a private space.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's brilliant. I wanted to ask Aimee as well, but I didn't mention this to you before, but I've just thought of it and I thought it's quite an important topic. In terms of nutrition, you see a hell of a lot of trends, don't you? Like popping up all the time. Like social media is obviously a big impact on that. How do you find that works with players? Do you find it captures players' attention and they come and ask questions to you? Or do you find that players are just trying things out in terms of their nutrition?
Yeah, I think so beginning of last season, was it? Maybe a little bit earlier, like so during the off season, a few players just decided that they were going to go vegan, but with like no, forward thinking plan of like what that actually looked like. So, a few players like lost unnecessary weight because there was no plan. So yeah, that was a little bit annoying, but it just shows how easy people are influenced, whether you watch something on telly or you read something or another player's just started doing something, so you're like, oh, do you know what, I'll have a try of it. And I'm all for trying different, I guess, ways of eating and fueling, but there's got to be like some kind of conversation first. But I'm just trying to think of the trends that I've seen. I've definitely like vegan, and then some people just randomly cutting out red meat.
Yeah.
But yeah, with no real, definition of why. And then I'm just trying to think. Like this hasn't happened with players at all, but like I feel like a big trend that I'm seeing at the minute is like fasting. And I'm not saying this is, in female footballers or anything. I guess it's more of a what just the average Joe is doing. So I'm interested to see if anyone mentions anything or has been trying any type of fasting during the off season, or they mention anything when we go back in for pre-season. Yeah, because I'm not against anything like this, but there's got to be there's got to be a reason, like there's got to be a rationale, and it can't impact performance at all.
And that's got to be the takeaway message, I think, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Because what someone at the the presentation when we were last there a couple of weeks ago asked around a question around, do any of your athletes perform like the sleep, what is it? God, my mind's blank. Train low, sleep low method, where recovering with really minimal carbs from like a fat loss perspective, or increasing cardiovascular health perspective kind of thing. And that is something that was a really good question, actually, because that was something that I was on a lot of CPDs, and we learned a lot about it in university. But in my current environment, like, it's something that I've never never thought about, but I just don't know. When you're getting, we just wouldn't bring players in to train fasted and things like. I'm not saying we never will, but from that like sleep low, train low approach, and that's another way of manipulating calorie intake. That's not happened, but it could be popular in other clubs, or maybe more in men's football. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, no, I think there's some really key messages in there, and I think a lot of it comes back to making sure you're having conversations, and I suppose also where you're getting your information from as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was going to ask just on that as well. If people ask that, because that's probably going to be a follow-up question from this sort of a topic. Well, how do I find out what information is good, what information I should be ignoring in terms of socials or anything? Where would you direct people in any sort of any way? Obviously for yourself, but anyone else? I know you mentioned a few people before, like Graham Close and people like that. Would there be anyone else?
We're trying to think who puts really good content on. Like James Moorhen puts really good content on his socials. And there's many links to different articles to, back up the reasoning behind different, nutrition strategies and things. So he put some really good stuff on. Just like Instagram, this is more boxing focused, but it can translate. Like I, save a lot of stuff and bookmark a lot of things from them. Like the Fight Dietitian, like puts a lot of good like nutrition and real life on the ground information out. But if you are really thinking about changing something for an athlete, or maybe testing it on yourself first, just research and read studies first, like see what is out there in the literature, and then maybe go a bit wider with the whole Instagram, as long as you're taking it with a pinch of salt if it's not, referenced or anything.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I wanted to speak about was nutrition for recovery. And I know you spoke a little bit before about the timing and consuming certain foods and stuff like that. But again, what are some of the main considerations around recovering from game to game?
Yeah, I'd say like thinking about, does the player have one game in that week to recover from? Is there two? Is there three? Because then, you need to map out what that week looks like, what the menu looks like, what the intakes for the players that have started look like compared to, the players that haven't really played many minutes. You can't really give that blanket approach. So I think looking at, what are the demands for that week for players, and then, fitting around kickoff times, travel, like what does that look like? Where are they going to be when they're recovering? Are they on a coach? Are they at home, on a plane? But I guess like some like I call them like nutrition non-negotiables, like protein. After a game, I'm always like protein and carbs. So your typical recovery shake, like within the hour of the final whistle, and then a balanced meal within the 2 hours. I say balanced meal, obviously bias more towards carbs and protein, but having some veggies and colour in there as well. And then like what are they doing the day after the game? Is it a night game? Because they're still going to be recovering in the morning. What does that breakfast look like? So yeah, I think just mapping it, if there's anyone listening that is thinking of, trying to map out, a congested fixture period, or even just one game weeks, just like thinking of those, aspects around a player's week and how, I guess, we can best make life a whole lot easier without the players having to think much. Yeah, protein and carbs, like obviously massive for recovery. And then do they need more if there's another game in 3 days? Like, the answer is yes, but how do you do that? How do you take that thought process away, or not necessarily take it fully away, just make it easier for the players to decide when they're away from you?
Yeah, I know you spoke, and it probably seems like a really small change, but I think it, like, after games when it's chaos and players obviously in your situation got media duties and all the rest of it to do after games. You said, didn't you, on the event around putting the shakes on in their place and that making such a big difference. And I think little things like that where it probably seems really small. Like, why can't they just get it from wherever it is? But those little things make a huge difference, don't they, for a player?
Yeah, and I think I've learned the hard way, and I've tried to follow players around the pitch and give them the shakes, and it just doesn't. Sometimes it's worked in the past, but with more fans wanting attention, like post game just looks different than it did 18 months ago.
Yeah.
It's not like you finish playing, they're coming in. There's a lot of time spent not on pitch, but for the sake of 5-10 minutes, well, for some players it could be a bit more. Like, rightly or wrongly, I just go and put it on the spot, and then they have it when they come into the changing room. So yeah, little things like that. Like, I've never read that in an article or whatever. It might not work in Chelsea or City, but it works here. So but saying that, like, there are some players that will, they want that shake in that moment, like even before you get into a huddle at the end of the game, after the final whistle. So, I'm saying, like, 80-90% want it inside and not when they're walking around clapping, signing autographs.
Yeah. And that, again, that just comes back to everything we've mentioned, isn't it? Knowing the players,
Mm-hmm.
just finding more about them and working with them over time. You start learning that, don't you, from each
Yeah, because you'd
individual.
also start to learn which ones you'll give it to on pitch, and you'll just put it down to sign something and never pick it up again.
Yeah, always good, always helpful.
Yeah.
You mentioned before about fasting, and one area I wanted to touch on. I saw recently that you basically went through a fast through Ramadan.
Yeah.
So where did that come from, and what will you give people a little bit of background as what that actually involves as well?
Yeah. So yeah, we had our first Muslim player signed for Manchester United in July of last summer, and we have a Muslim member of staff, and he performed, Ramadan, which is a period of 30 days, 30 nights of fasting. So, and then you also, within those 30 days, you commit to prayer, which, I didn't do, I just done the fasting. But for practicing Muslims, you commit to prayer up to like 5 times per day. So from dawn till dusk. So say, for example, the sun rises at, let's say, 6 a.m. for numbers' sake, then you would have to have your food and drink finished by 5:59. And then, for example, say the sun sets at 8 p.m. that evening, you have nothing to eat or drink until the sun sets. So I done it that way. But our player and other Muslims, they practice Ramadan not in a different way, but they go from something called, I can never pronounce it, Sahir, or it's Sahua, I don't really know. I call it all different things. So theirs is even earlier than sunset. So it's from Sahir. So it's, sometimes it was an hour earlier,
Right.
sometimes a bit more. So because then they would eat and drink and then they would pray until sunset. So yeah, mine was the basic sunrise to sunset, and it happens every year, but it changes. It's never the same time every year. It changes with the cycles of the moon. And so if I'm right in saying it's going to move backwards 3 weeks than what it was this year. So, people were like, oh my God, it was amazing what you're doing. And, it was really good. But, I've got so much respect for, athletes and, any other Muslim that does it in the summer, like the height of summer now, because, sunset is later. So the heat really impacts everything. So, I think it would have been a whole different ball game if Ramadan fell, middle of June or right now. I don't know if I'd look back on it with fond memories, to be honest. But yeah, we had our first player, and I don't know. I was just like, you know what? I've never worked with a Muslim player before who's done this, and I felt like the only way for me to really learn and like understand was to do it myself. And I wasn't training during the normal daytime hours, around lunchtime like our player was, but I was training in the morning. So I used to get my training done before sunrise. So I used to get up super early, train, then eat, and then go to work. But but for our player, we train in the middle of the day. So I can't fully say that we're doing it the same way. But yeah, it's funny looking back, because when I was making these like nutrition plans based on everything I was reading and people that I was speaking to, I thought these plans were, she just has to get so many calories in the morning, so many calories in the evening. But then when I was actually doing it, I was like, wow, like when I was like, say 10 days in, I was like, I understand why players struggle with like appetite, tiredness, like fatigue. So it, like for our player, it just wasn't as easy as like me splitting the calories down the middle and go and have so much here and then the rest at sunset. Because there was just so many different things going on, and sometimes she actually slept through an alarm because she was that tired, which obviously I was like, oh, I can't do that. But then like I understood it. So I look back on those like nutrition plans now, and the content is correct, but the context, I didn't have it, but I've got it now. But yeah, I've got so much respect for that, and they do it every single year. I've only done it once.
Yeah. Well, listen, in terms of like building trust and respect with players, like I don't think there's anything bigger that you can do than that. So full respect to you for doing it. But I mean, in terms of nutritionally, when you look at that, that just shouldn't work, should it? Players shouldn't be able to train, they shouldn't be able to play. But it's just fascinating. You see it all the time, don't you, with players playing at the top level, that they're still competing. They're competing at a really good level as well. So I know you've probably not got an answer to this, but how do they do it?
Honestly, like your body is amazing at adapting, isn't it? And like my body adapted to not being thirsty after like 3 days. So like my need for thirst, I found that the easiest thing, whereas our player found thirst the hardest and food the easiest.
Right.
So everyone's different, and some players, I guess there's different. You can not bend the rules, so to speak, but if it really was too hot, or a player may decide to swill their mouth with fluids and spit it out.
Yeah.
Or there's some players that allow themselves to have a drink during training, and they're still practicing Ramadan. There's just a lot of different, I guess, ways to do it, but you've got to speak to your community and things like that. So all I can say is your body adapts, and mine adapted in really quickly to not being thirsty, so just being dehydrated like for 10 hours a day. But yeah, like what game was I watching? I think it was an Everton game, and Decore plays for the men's team. Like he broke his fast, didn't he, like during like an 8 o'clock kickoff.
Yeah.
And yeah, and like is his capacity to, you know, distance covered and everything during a game. It honestly just blows your mind. I don't know. But then also what I appreciated was, you know, I was so committed to it, and I wasn't doing it for a bigger purpose to, like, you know, to get anything back. You know, like to I wasn't praying to anyone, or, you know, I wasn't religious in that sense, but I was still very committed. So I really understood why, like, our player, and, you know, you can use Decorah as an example, like they would like run to the end of the earth to sacrifice the body because they believe they're going to, you know, get positive, you know, things back. So I get like the power of religion in that sense, because
Yeah.
people were like, why are you still doing it? Like, you know, you're not Muslim. And I was like, I know. But now I know how powerful their belief is,
Yeah.
and how they'll just, you know, do it in the height of summer.
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And I think you'd really struggle to understand it fully, and probably still, isn't it? But
Yeah, yeah, I got thought there,
you'd
definitely.
have a much better understanding from going through that. And I'm
Hmm.
sure the player has got so much respect for you for doing that. And yeah, I think it's incredible. It's incredible that they can do it and perform at such a high level. I find it amazing. But
Yeah, and with that relationship thing, like, it really did bring us closer together. So, like, she was a player that didn't speak great English when she first came, and, you know, it got better and better over time. And then, you know, when she couldn't believe it, that, like, because we also, I'm not going to take, like, obviously full credit for doing it, but we also had different members of staff, like just doing it for a day or 2 days. We had a catering assistant who done it as well for,
yeah,
I don't know if it was the whole thing or it was like 3 weeks out of the 4. So we had different members of staff dipping in at different times, which was just amazing. Like some players like, can we do it? I was like, no. But, you know, it just created like a really, yeah, a bit of a buzz. And the player,
yeah,
because the player used to play in Spain, and, you know, I'm assuming that no one's ever, like, you know, volunteered to do it before. So she was completely blown away.
mm,
And it definitely brought the whole team closer together. And that I didn't think that it would have. It was just a byproduct of conversations, and yeah, just a bit of like a nice vibe together.
yeah. No, brilliant.
It's good.
I'm sure we could do a whole podcast on just that alone, because I think it's
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe we should at some point. But no, it's really, really cool. Aimee, we always finish the podcast with the quick 5 questions. So I
Hmm.
want to just put these across to you. In terms of the first one, who've been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Yeah, I would say, um so a performance coach that I used to work with, Elle Turner. So she was the person that was the performance coach when I first started at Manchester United. And she was, like, support wise, she was like amazing. She really made me think of things from like a different angle. So it was, you know, something as simple, and I never forget. I don't know why. I don't know why it always sticks in my mind. But on like a match day, you know, the first few match days I ever worked, like she was just chilling, eating, sipping on like a hot chocolate, you know, cool as a cucumber, and, you know, it's chaotic, isn't it, on a match day for a lot of staff and everything. And then and then she just mentioned like why. She was just like, you know, I don't want to give off any, you know, stressed or anxious feeling like around, you know, a match environment. And I was just like, oh yeah, like, it just made total sense. Um, and she just said, if a player sees you stressed, and it'll just have a knock-on effect.
Yeah,
So just like, I guess, golden nuggets like that, and she just gave me the support that, like, I needed at that time, and like helped, like, push me in the right direction. Because she was the one that was, I guess, overseeing nutrition at the time, as performance coaches like have to do still. So yeah, she was like great for like being a mentor, like really, really early on my career, and I'd say it's still early on now, but at the very, very start.
Brilliant. Episode 208. Anyone that wants to listen to Elle speak, to check it then while you're speaking. The next one is, what would you say your biggest strength is? And I'm sure you've probably mentioned quite a few already, but what was your biggest strength as a practitioner, do you think?
I would say being able to understand females. And I don't mean that like, and I mean it from like an angle from, you know, when you just know that someone's not having a good day, like it's like a female thing. Or like, you know, you look at someone and you go, yeah, like you don't really need to go near them today, or you do need to go near them today, kind of vibe. And I think just understanding the moods and the roller coaster of emotions that females go through across a month. And also from like a nutrition perspective, like I've made the mistakes in the past, like, you know, I take training really seriously. I've, you know, competed in a lot of different things in different sports, and I've made a lot of nutrition mistakes. So I can always relate when, you know, a player might not have eaten properly before a game, or they haven't got an appetite around the period. So I feel like I can definitely just be that normal human. And I think it's quite a nice, not nice, but like it's a job role that, you know, you're not a coach, you're not that like compulsory member of staff, you're quite a new evolving member of staff. And I think you get a lot of conversations that maybe an assistant coach might not get from a player. So yeah, I think that, I don't even know whether to give you like a proper answer, but just being able to like understand and listen. And I am that person to just always go the extra mile, and I can create problems for myself by doing that. I think there's a fine line. But I'll never forget, like I got it was like an end of season awards, and it was like a really like jokey one, but there was some serious parts in it. Last season, my award was like the Unsung Hero Award. And I was like, oh, that's actually, like, I didn't realize, you know, the things I was doing. I just thought they were normal, but I guess little things go a long way. And, you know, a really small staff team with that stretched, and I guess players notice, which I didn't really think they did.
Yeah, definitely. Another really important lesson, I think, for people there. When you're not always going to get people acknowledging it at the time, are you? But people do appreciate the extra work.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. Apart from come back to Liverpool, if you speak to Aimee that went up to Scotland, in terms of career advice, if you were to speak to Aimee at that point, or a student at that point in their career, what would be the top bit of career advice that you'd give?
Oh, that's a really good question. Don't worry if the plan that you've got in your head isn't happening, because it took me, you know, 8-9 years from that Aimee that went to Dundee to really find what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, don't worry that it's not happened in 5 years. You haven't gone like bam, bam, bam into a master's, into a PhD. You know, it happens for some, but because it can be normalized, can't it? It can be like, oh, that's a normal path that needs to be taken. But yeah, I'd just say, you know, if you're 18 years old, you don't really know what you want to do. Just don't be too worried that if it goes off path a bit, because all those jobs that I've had in the past, like hundreds of them, I don't regret any of them, because they've helped in some way, whether it be being able to speak to someone or understanding someone a little bit more. I think if I didn't have those 7-8 years of working with the public, I don't think I'd be able to hold conversations or, you know, relate to people that much, really.
Yeah, no, it's another great point, because I think people don't take note at times how much they're developing in certain positions, do they? And it's only years later when you reflect on things. Like we spoke about it on here before. You could be in a bar job. You might end up working in the Premier League or WSL or whatever it is, but that bar job's give you communication skills of dealing with
Yeah.
people in different positions. You just don't realize at the time.
Yeah.
So no, I think
And
it's a great point.
understanding like how that you can function when you're tired.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. So
working
many
long hours
lessons.
and yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Aimee, final one. In
Yep.
terms of CPD, continued development for you as a practitioner, like how do you go about that?
From like a club perspective, I can always, you know, there's like a research and development pot fund kind of thing. So I can always, if I see a course online, you know, I'm lucky enough, you know, that if there's money in the budget, I can jump on it. I'm very like driven by CPD, and I'm not someone that likes to stand still really. So like, you know, I have got, you know, aspirations to do a PhD or a prof doc, like whatever path um it it takes. But I think I'll always across the sea, if you think from like the start of the season to the end, I'll always try and get to a couple of conferences in person and online, just to, because I struggle to like keep on top of like reading all the time. It's something I can definitely do better at. Um, so I get more like motivation and drive from actually being there in person or being on a video like this kind of thing and learning, than just sitting there reading the paper.
Yeah, awesome. Aimee, this has been great. Thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
coming on. I knew it'd be good, so you've definitely lived up to it. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you.
Just finish us up with, if people have got questions, if they want to just keep an eye with what's going on with yourself, like where would you direct them?
Yes, you can head to Instagram, Committed Nutrition 2020, Twitter. Yeah, I'm on there now again, Aimee Ellen1, and then you can always drop me an email, like committednutrition@hotmail.com. Forgot that then. I've not used it for a while.
I'll post all that in the show notes as well. So if anyone's got anything, I'm sure they will reach out. But no, thank you very much for coming on. It's been great to chat again.
Oh, thanks so much for the invite, Ben. I appreciate it.